Hello dear viewers, welcome to Jamuna Television. I am your host 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁𝘀𝗀𝗶. Today we have a very special guest among us. We have today UN Human Rights spokesperson 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 and we will have a very meaningful discussion with her. Thank you for joining with Jamuna Television. It's been a pleasure to have you among us. We have a plenty of questions regarding the human rights issues here in Bangladesh and also about the fact-finding reports. My first question is about the scope and methodology of the reports. So what was the primary focus of the UN fact-finding report on Bangladesh?
Thank you so much for having me and for covering this important report. So the genesis of the report was really, it was a call from the interim government itself to the High Commissioner, calling on us to do an objective and independent fact-finding of the events between the 1st of July and the 15th of August last year in the context of the protests. So that covered the period of the protests itself, but also several days after the protests. We were asked to look into objectively identifying what happened. We as the UN Human Rights Office are completely independent and objective. We don't have a political leaning or any kind of vested interest. Our only interest is in helping in whatever way we can to ensure the promotion and protection of human rights for all in Bangladesh. So we took on this endeavor. We were asked to identify the root causes of the protests as well, because obviously these things don't just come out of nowhere. There was an immediate trigger for the protests, which was, of course, the quota system. But the issues run much deeper than that. So then we took on this investigation. We have carried out more than 230 interviews with victims, witnesses, medical professionals, lawyers, and also with former and current government officials. We've also conducted forensic analysis, digital forensics and medical forensic analysis, weapons analysis as well, to try to corroborate the facts to a reasonable degree.
Well, just I wanted to know about the investigation team. How did they do? Already you have said about these issues. So regarding that perspective, just I want to know, how does the UN ensure the credibility of anonymous testimonies?
So our standard human rights methodology is that we do not rely on secondhand testimony. Anything that we include in the report has to have been corroborated as well. So for example, if we had testimony from former officials about the former prime minister's involvement, if you just have one account, we would not go with that. But we had multiple accounts that reinforced the same point through different interviews. We also had access to documentation that corroborated the claims that people made during interviews. And as I said, we also used digital forensic analysis. We looked at medical reports. We engaged a weapons expert as well to actually look at X-rays and determine which weapon would have been responsible for which kind of bullet, which led to the death of individuals. So those are some of the ways in which we try to ensure the credibility of the facts.
𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃, just I would like to know about the accountability and justice right now, and here is the point that the primary focus, of UN fact-finding mission was based on human rights violation taken place from July 1st till 15th August, as you mentioned before. How do these findings supplement the judiciary and current reformation committees of Bangladesh?
So accountability is absolutely key. We were asked to identify root causes and also find ways to ensure that this could never happen again in Bangladesh, to learn lessons from this very painful period so that this would never happen again. And we've come up with a range of recommendations on institutional reform, on law reform, but also on accountability. Now, accountability, justice, and transitional justice are essential, but very difficult to manage in this environment, because while the government has changed, a lot of the individuals who are working in the judicial system, in the police, in the investigative branches remain the same. And a lot of the kind of entrenched practices of the use of ill treatment and torture in detention, for example, or the laying of spurious charges against several individuals at one time, a lot of these practices will take time to root out. There's also, of course, the International Crimes Tribunal of Bangladesh itself, which there have been some steps to reform some of the problems with it, but there remain some serious flaws with regards to due process of this tribunal. So what we are asking for is, first of all, we are asking for accountability to be prioritized, and it has to be at the national level, done in a systematic manner. We are also suggesting the involvement of the International Criminal Court. In fact, we're asking Bangladesh itself to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court, which would serve as a complementary means of ensuring justice and accountability for the international crimes that we've documented in this report.
The report highlights the excessive use of force against students and minors. What specific recommendation does the UN propose to address these violations?
Indeed, we've documented the excessive use of force by various security forces against the protesters and against bystanders, both in the context of the protests themselves, in the context of roadblocks that had been set up, but also in the context of arbitrary arrests and detentions that took place. Our recommendations, again, go to the roots of the problem. For a long time in Bangladesh, there's been a politicization of the police and the security sector as well. And the institutions need to be reformed so that there is proper oversight on the independent oversight on the actions of security forces. So that, for example, is one way in which accountability can be furthered. Another, I think, important recommendation is ensuring the protection of victims and witnesses. Of course, we receive information that victims and witnesses were either intimidated or they were actually in a way coerced into certain claims that were untrue. So that there is still a lot of that going on. So there needs to be a proper process for victim and witness protection as well, and the preservation of evidence. Unfortunately, we also came across reports that there have been some attempts to destroy evidence of violations.
How did the investigation determine command responsibility for human rights violations, and what international legal principles guided this process?
As I said, in fact, we had access to senior government officials, former senior government officials, and they were able to give us quite a lot of credible information that some of these orders came from the highest level, the orders to use force to suppress the protesters, to suppress dissent at all costs. We have a lot of information about this. So there, again, we were able to take the information from different sources, from interviews, from documentation, and paint a picture which we have reasonable grounds to believe that there was culpability at the highest levels in the commission of possible crimes against humanity.
As you know, what happened after 5th August, so police station and the key infrastructure sites were attacked. How does the UN propose balancing accountability for both state-led brutality and acts of political violence?
This is an extremely important question. There was, of course, a lot of violence on the 5th of August after the former Prime Minister's departure and subsequently as well. And there were very worrying reports of attacks against people who were assumed to be affiliated with the former regime, with the Awami League or with any of their supporters. There were also reports of attacks against minorities, attacks against Hindus, against Ahmadiyya Muslims, etc. The report also covers this. And the report really insists that there needs to be accountability for such acts, regardless of who the perpetrators are. It's really important going forward for all Bangladeshis that there is criminal justice and a truth-telling process of transitional justice as well, so that people move away from this mindset of binary identity, that you belong to this political party, you belong to this minority, and therefore we are distinct from each other. We need to move towards a system where all Bangladeshis forge a national identity. And I understand that the interim government has taken some steps in that regard. They have made some important statements as well about the need to ensure accountability. And we feel this is absolutely crucial, that people are held accountable for their actions regardless of their political affiliation.
Well, Ravina, as you know that after 5th August, number of politicians from Awami League, they had been arrested, and so how is the UN ensuring the detained political figures and opposition members receive their fair trials, if we talk about their issues?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we have reports also from last week in the context of the new operation that was launched by the government on this, the Operation Devil Hunt. And based on information that we've received, approximately 1,100 to 1,300 individuals have been arrested over just a few days. Now, unfortunately, we have limited ability to be able to monitor these new incidents. We received a mandate to cover the period from the 1st of July until the 5th of August. So for that, we were able to do very detailed fact-finding and analysis and corroboration. On this, we have quite limited ability. We need to confirm what is the basis of the charges and whether the legal rights of the people who are arrested has been respected. From a human rights perspective, what is crucial is that every individual who is arrested has access to their due process and fair trial rights. And this includes promptly notifying each of the detainees of the specific charge that is being laid against them and making sure that they have access to legal counsel to ensure a timely review, judicial review of their detention, and very crucially, to take steps to ensure that they are not ill-treated in detention. We are ready to support. We have been talking for a while with the interim government about strengthening our presence in the country so that we are able to continue to contribute to monitoring independently the situation and to provide advice and assistance as needed.
That's great to hear. In the investigation time, you have collected a number of information from different stakeholders like government or the public as well. So is there any allegation of data manipulation or suppression? If it is, then how did the UN address this concern?
Indeed, I'm looking at the report because, you know, it's a very long and detailed and very rich report. And for example, in paragraph 259 of the report, we did hear that from a witness with inside knowledge, security officials have sought to destroy evidence of torture, for example. And that, you know, police in July, for example, also gave an intimidating visit to a close family member of one of the accused officers. Intelligence officers tried to pressure the family's lawyer. So there are a lot of concerns about the destruction of evidence. There are also concerns that there was intimidation of healthcare professionals. So we have reports of security officials who went into hospitals and they pressured medical professionals to list the cause of death as accidental bullet injury. There was a lot of that going on. So there are huge concerns about those obstacles to accountability as well.
Well, let's talk about the police reform especially and the governance issues in Bangladesh. As you know, the Police Act of 1861 during the British rule that was still ongoing here in Bangladesh. Multiple attempts have been already taken in several times. Probably if you talk about in 2007, there was an attempt to reform it. But it never happened. So should the interim government prioritize implementing it for meaningful police reform?
Absolutely. Again, I'm going back to the report. We have a clear recommendation that the 1861 Police Act needs to be reformed urgently. And as I said before, it's really also crucial that there is an independent oversight body that is created to look into to manage the appointment, promotions of police officers as well, and to carry out oversight. So this is absolutely crucial. The report makes a series of recommendations with regard to police reform. And this has to do with reforming police investigation techniques, ensuring that any alleged violations by police officers are also promptly investigated and acted upon. Now, this requires institutional reforms. It requires legal reforms. It also requires signals from high-level officials of what is acceptable and what is not. What we found during the protests as well is that weapons were used that were actually military-grade weapons that were used against unarmed protesters in many instances. There were also instances where police and security officers, there seemed to be a vengeance to their actions, perhaps acts that were emboldened by orders from the top, but also by a sense of impunity. There's this one particular case of a boy whose hand was shot because he was throwing stones. And he was told that now you will not be able to throw stones anymore. I mean, those are the kinds of acts that really paint a picture of just how brutal the suppression was and just how brazen it was, and with the assumption that the perpetrator would enjoy impunity.
Indeed, we have many more things to know, and now we'll talk about the democratic stability and freedom of speech. And as I mentioned before to you, that many of the Bangladeshis are talking about the ban on BSL, especially Bangladesh Chhatro League, and ongoing demand of banning Awami League as well. So do you think that it goes against the sanctity of democracy?
We are against the banning of political parties as a whole. Now, of course, if there are individuals from the Chhatro League, from various political parties who have alleged to have committed crimes, they should be held accountable. They should be subject to a fair trial. But the acts of individual members or even the leadership of an organization cannot automatically be grounds for the restriction of the right to freedom of association. Again, what our report is recommending is that we move away from this historically binary approach to identity, of these identity politics. What we really need in Bangladesh, what Bangladeshis really need, is a genuine multi-party democracy. The ban or dissolution of a particular association or political party would be it would be a serious restriction of the freedom of association.
As we talked about the democratic stability, so I want to talk about the current government or the interim government. So what risk does Bangladesh face if democratic reform falter under Yunus interim leadership?
As the High Commissioner has said, this is a fragile time. Transitions are always fragile. We are encouraged by the very fact that we were invited as the UN Human Rights Office to carry out this investigation, and that it was welcomed by the government is a very important signal. We understand that reform commissions have also been formed. It is not going to be easy. We also understand that elections are, a date has now been set, has it, for December, if I'm not mistaken. There is a lot to do. It's a very fragile situation. We are ready to assist. We're ready to strengthen our presence in the country and assist in any way we can. It is crucial that these reforms do take place, institutional reforms, legal reforms, going back to the root causes of this, the terrible incidents in July and August. So there are encouraging steps that are being taken. Perhaps there's a need for some patience, but at the same time, there is a need for transparency and an inclusive approach from the interim government as well.
Ravina, as we talk about that you are monitoring the situation currently right now here in Bangladesh, what's the things are going on? If you know, the suppression of dissent has been a concern right now. So what is the UN assessment of the current state of freedom of speech in Bangladesh?
You know, again, things cannot change overnight because the system of repression was so entrenched, and the laws lend themselves so easily to overbroad reach by the authorities and to suppression of dissent. We are continuing to receive reports of concern. Now, again, as I said, we don't have this full mandate at the moment to be able to monitor as closely the current situation as we did between July and August. But we are receiving worrying reports of journalists, for example, who feel intimidated or where spurious charges have been laid against them, of people who are targeted for their perceived affiliation with various political parties. Again, it is crucial that the interim government sends a clear signal that this is not acceptable, and they take steps to hold accountable the individual perpetrators of any human rights violations, regardless of their political affiliation.
So you include in the after 5th August to 15th August. So
yes, absolutely, yes. No, there must not be any blanket, amnesty granted to people who are responsible for serious violations. This is absolutely the case. Now, criminal justice will not resolve everything, and it may be a matter of taking a transitional justice approach, which some other countries have done, where it is also about truth-telling, about healing, about reconciliation. about reparations of different forms. It doesn't have to be criminal justice, but where the violations are serious enough, there does need to be criminal justice as well.
How can Bangladesh learn from the democratic transition as you talked about, and it happens in Sri Lanka, Chile, and Guatemala? So, what best practices should it consider implementing?
There are a lot of examples globally of transitional justice processes emerging from a state of extreme repression and attempting to build a democratic future. We can help with this. So the High Commissioner has a global mandate, and we have supported and advised on transitional justice processes in many different parts of the world. So we would be happy to continue to advise the interim government on this. Bangladesh as a whole, working with civil society, with all the stakeholders on the ground to take this forward. Some lessons, in fact, this is also an opportunity for perhaps Bangladesh to set an example of what can be accomplished if you sincerely have human rights and social justice at the core of building this new nation. It's something that perhaps other countries can learn from Bangladesh. But there are institutions that are set up, for example, for missing people, for people who have disappeared. And this has happened in Chile, one of the countries that you cited. That would be a very welcome step. And in fact, I believe one of the first ratifications that the interim government did in August was to the International Convention on Enforced Disappearances, which again is a very welcome step. Now it's about implementing.
Well, so it's my last question, and what will be the next? Probably you are going to monitor the situation, what's going on here, and you are looking forward to have a democratic movement or the democratic Bangladesh as well, or especially a peaceful election, indeed.
Absolutely. So we shared the report, of course, with the authorities as well, and we received some feedback from them, but we're looking forward to much more in-depth engagement with them on the basis of the findings and the recommendations of this report. Of course, what we are hoping is that this report will really be seen by the people of Bangladesh as speaking to them. I hope that they find that it really reflects what they went through and their aspirations for the future. At the end of the day, we came in to assist, to collect the information, to assess it in an objective fashion, and to make recommendations based on international human rights laws and standards. So we hope that Bangladeshis will be able to take this report forward. We are absolutely ready to assist, and we will also be calling on the international community to do all that they can to ensure that Bangladesh is facilitated in emerging as a truly democratic nation with peace and the stability that comes with that.
Thank you, Rafina. It was a nice conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us, for joining with Jamuna Television.
Thank you very much.